The topic is Islam, oppressive or misrepresented. And we're going to have Upogu that is going to be on the side of Islam being oppressive, which we would say it's the affirmative position, and Jakalak who says that Islam is actually misrepresented. As per debate rules, we're going to let Upogu start first. He's going to have 10 minutes that are going to start as soon as he opens his mouth and says the first word. And whenever you're ready, Upogu, you can start, and I will start counting.
Can I
Just
have
a question
1 minute
before
just
this
to run grab my
begins.
water?
Just, just
Okay.
a question before we begin. How do you record debates? How do you record it?
I mean, we don't usually record debates on the channel. Like the people that are part of the debate, they might want to record the debate if they want to. If not, they don't have to. There's no prerequisite for them doing so. Obviously, people are free to do it. Luigi, for example, Luigi asked if anybody can record the audio, and I shall be doing that favor to him. I will be recording only the audio with my OBS, and I shall give it to him
That is fine by me.
after it's done.
Yep, understood.
So just voice, basically.
And do I have to put my video?
Okay.
Do I have to turn
No.
on my camera?
No,
Or-
You don't have to,
no,
but
no, you don't
it,
have to.
yeah.
Usually, it's not bad, if people do it, but you don't have to.
Sure. Okay, got it. Let's start.
Okay, everyone ready?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
So, hi, I'm Yupo, usually one of the staff on MDD. So, let's get this started. Judges, audiences, and fellow debaters, let's stop tiptoeing around an uncomfortable truth. Islam, as is traditionally practiced and enforced in many parts of the world, is oppressive to women. Not because of isolated misinterpretations, not because of cultural distortions, but because of the very texts and laws that govern Islamic life place women in a fundamentally subordinate position to men. So let's talk facts. In Islamic jurisprudence, a man's word is literally worth a man's word is literally worth more than a woman's. In court, her testimony can be legally valued at half that of a man's. In inheritance, she receives half that of what a brother would. In marriage, a man can have 4 wives, while a woman is only allowed 1 husband. And if she wants to leave him, good luck. Divorce is heavily skewed in the man's favor. He can say a few words and essentially walk away. She, on the other hand, leads them through a bunch of legal, financial, and social hoops. So let's talk about control in the name of this. In the name of Islam, women are forced to cover themselves, restricted from traveling alone without a mahram, which is essentially usually a relative that they need to travel with, and denied equal access to education and jobs in countries like Iran, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia. The state literally acts as a religious enforcer of gender apartheid. A woman's body, voice, and freedom are not really hers. They're controlled by men with Quran in one hand and the law in the other. Let's not pretend this is all some fringe interpretations. These laws aren't being enforced by extremists in a cave, they're being encoded into national constitutions, upheld by judges, preached in mosques, and normalized by millions. You can't really call it a misunderstanding when it's government policy, religious dogma, and daily reality for 500 million women. Now, yes, some Muslims argue that Islam is inherently equal and has always been twisted by patriarchy, but here's the problem. Those progressive interpretations are the minority. They don't govern countries, they don't write laws, they don't define the status quo. When religion tells women they're weaker, worthless, and must obey, that's oppression. When your legal system enforces it, that's systemic oppression. And when you silence those who question it by calling them Islamophobic or disrespectful, you're protecting an ideology at the expense of human rights. Islamic oppression of women is not just theoretical, it's legal, cultural, and deadly. It's real, it's global, and it's happening now. To deny this would be to turn a blind eye to millions of women who are living under these conditions. Oppression is oppression, no matter how sacred the book, how ancient the law, or how devout the believer. So, let's not waste time sugarcoating it. Islam is in its core doctrines and legal structures and lived realities fundamentally oppressive to women, not accidentally, not culturally, but systemically, scripturally, and intentionally. We're not talking about fringe extremists, we're talking about mainstream interpretation of a religion followed by over 1 billion people. One that at its foundation institutionalizes female inferiority. Even with the Quran itself, let's say Quran 4:34, men are in charge of women because Allah has made one of them excel the other. Righteous women are obedient, and those whom you fear disobedience, admonish them, banish them to beds apart, and beat them. Yeah, beat them. The Quran explicitly gives men the right to discipline their wives physically. This isn't a metaphor, it isn't allegory, this isn't literal script. This is literal scripture across the Islamic world to justify domestic violence. Some might talk about how harsh it is, different story. Let's talk about women's legal status. Quran 2:282, and bring two witnesses from among your men, and if 2 men are not available, then a man and 2 women, so that if one woman errs, the other can remind her. Essentially, a translation of this is that women's mind is so unreliable, you need 2 of them to equal that of one man's. It's not equality, it's codified misogyny. If you go to Quran 4:11, Allah commands you regarding your children, for the male, a share equivalent that of 2 females. Even in death, a woman is worth half of a man. Daughters, wives, and mothers are legally devalued under Islamic inheritance law. And this inheritance law is not even mathematically correct either way. If you talk about sexual control, Islamic's treatment of women's sexuality is not just restrictive, it's authoritarian. Quran 24:31 tells the believing woman to lower her gaze and guard their chastity and not to display their adornment except what is apparent, and to draw veils over their bosoms. This verse is used to enforce hijab, niqab, and burqas, not as a choice, but as an obligation, with punishments, harassments, and public beatings for disobedience in countries like Iran and Afghanistan. Meanwhile, men, free to look, roam, rule, whatever. And as I mentioned earlier, Quran 4:3, regarding polygamy, marry women of your choice, 2, 3, 4. Islam gives men the right to marry up to 4 women, or in the Prophet's case, I think it was 12, I could be wrong on that number, while women are forbidden from marrying more than 1 man, because apparently women's bodies are community property, while men get sexual variety sanctioned by God. Still not convinced by its oppression? Let me remind you that actually, I can't say that part because it's banned. Genital mutilation is common practice, not necessarily by the Quran, but it's very common in the Islamic culture. Honor killings, forced veilings, and female disinheritance are not random cultural tragedies. They're regularly justified through Islamic scripture and jurisprudence. When religion becomes law, as it does in countries such as Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, women live under totalitarian gender apartheid. They can't leave their house without permission. They can't travel freely. They can't refuse sex in marriage. In some cases, they can't even show their face. And who's to say that's not real Islam? Let me ask, what Islam dominates the government, the courts, the mosques? It's not the reformed Western-friendly version. It's the patriarchal version rooted in these scriptures, unchallenged for centuries. It's not Islamophobia, it's reality. Religious freedom does not mean religious immunity from criticism, especially when that religion is used to dominate and dehumanize half the population. Women under Islam are not equal, not legally, not sexually, not socially, and not spiritually. And to deny that is to be complicit in the continuous obligation. Oppression is oppression, even when with the mask of faith. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Shupogo. That was like almost 7 minutes. So, Jakolak, whenever you are ready, you can start. I will start the clock at your first word. You will have to unmute first.
Oh, hello everybody. Popogo, you made some really good points. About women in Islam, and I respect your level of analysis for that. But I'll state my position clearly and promptly, in that in that Islam, when people interpret the verses and the hadiths in Islam, it's commonly to do with the actions of the worst people, rather than what Islam actually teaches at its core, which is justice, mercy, and compassion towards those who are disadvantaged. One quote I can instantly cite for that is in the Hadith Sahih Muslim. The Prophet Muhammad said, beware of oppression, for oppression will be darkness in the day of judgment." And it's clear in this verse that it condemns any oppression in Islam, and that misinterpretations of oppression in Islam is not to do with Islam itself. It is political, is fueled by political, social, cultural factors which do not accurately represent what it teaches. Another verse I can cite is Allah says in the Quran, chapter 10, verse 44, "God does not wrong people at all. It is the people who wrong themselves." So it's putting the responsibility on the individuals themselves rather than God who created these laws for others. And it's a misuse of Islam's actual teachings rather than Islam. And this essentially says that oppression in Islam is mostly misrepresented by judging people based on the worst action. And my second section I'm going to go into is that justice and mercy are essential pillars in which our treatment of people. For in Quran, chapter 16 and verse 90, indeed Allah commands justice and good conduct, showing that people should focus more on the proportional harm that is caused by others. So any form of oppression shouldn't be allowed. As I said earlier in the Beware of Oppression Hadith 1. And that Prophet Muhammad is known as the mercy of all worlds. He is the most merciful to all of his people that he talks to on a day. And that's justice and mercy in Islam, the second section. And going over a few misconceptions about Islam. Let's start with Islam is violent. There is a clear Quranic quote, chapter 5, verse 32. "Whoever kills a soul, it is as if he had slain mankind entirely." Islam clearly prohibits any innocent lives being taken, and prohibits any form of aggression towards your brothers and sisters. A soul refers to anybody. And within this, and Islam and Prophet Muhammad ﷺ teach gentleness towards others rather than full violence against. And the second misconception is Islam forces people to convert. There is an undeniable quote in Quran chapter 2 verse 256 that says, "There is no compulsion in religion. Truth stands out clear from error." This means that Muslims should allow others to freely practice their religious beliefs, and there is no way you can say, and if not, then the belief in Islam is not valid under pressure. And this goes directly against the idea of oppression and forced belief. And finally, another misconception is that Islam gives no rights to women. There are clear verses in the Quran that state otherwise. in Quran chapter 49 verse 13, every man and women are equal. It literally said every man and women are equal, which means that the treatment of men and women in terms of their worth and contributions should be acknowledged in a Islamic society. And keep in mind that prior to Islam, female infanticide were common, where babies' heads were buried alive. Women were inherited like property, and women were forced to marry and couldn't get to divorce. After the introduction of Islam, it allowed women to financially provide for themselves, as in Quran chapter 4:32, verse 32, which talks about women earning as much as she works for, so showing the right to own and manage property. And both women and men have the same objective, to pursue the pursuit of truth and to be kind to others. Cited in Quran chapter 9 verse 71, men and women are allies of one another. So it's clear from these few Quranic verses and the context at the time that Islam introduced lots of rights to women and showing a feministic attitude towards women more than. And just one more fact, women's name remained intact after marriage with the introduction of Islam. So to conclude my stance on this, well, Islam, when the objective of oppression is not to, the true objective of Islam was to end oppression. The oppression is not accurately captured in the true Islamic beliefs. And the question is not whether Islam is oppressive, it is whether it is fairly analyzed through proper scripture analysis and proper interpretations. That's all, guys. That's all for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Jacolak. That was it for the opening introductions from both debaters. Now you guys are going to have 30 minutes of uninterrupted back and forward. I would suggest you guys be nice with each other, leave enough time for the other to respond to your questions. If not, I will probably have to intervene at some point in time, okay? So, as soon as you guys start talking, I will start counting.
You want to go first, Pugu?
You mentioned something about wanting this part to be somewhat structured, or are you fine with it being open? So we don't get a confusion later.
I'm fine with it being open, Pugu.
Okay.
You go first.
So,
respects.
In response to your opening, well, you didn't attack mine and yours, which is fair enough. You technically shouldn't, so you did all good in that. But in oppression, it's not necessarily had anything to do with violence in of itself, and I'm not necessarily comparing Islam to the 5th century. I'm comparing it to today. And being less oppressive does not mean not oppressive. There's a massive difference between the two.
Interesting point you raised there. Less oppressive, not oppressive. But it's clear from the context at the time when Islam was introduced that women now had rights that they didn't have before in most Arabia societies at the time, where they were unfairly treated as property, where they were constantly mutilated, inherited, like buried buried alive, and forced to marry and couldn't get a divorce.
I am
And
fine
with
with
the
accept.
introduction of Islam, it completely nullified these traditions and these practices, approving, giving women the right to have a voice, to choose to divorce, and choose to marry whoever they want. They are protected, and not being treated like property, and that literally clearly in Quran chapter 49 verse 13, every man and women are equal, which shows that men and women are in the good, are both. Regardless of gender, it's more about the actions of the individuals rather than the gender.
Well, sure, I accept.
cite that as a really strong against oppression.
I accept that it's most likely better than whatever was at the time. That is still not equating it not being oppressive. And you said that men and women are equal, but unless you're completely rejecting the Quran itself, that's a contradiction. Because 411 says that women take half that of a man. And as for your being able to marry anyone, I would take that back to people being married off at a very young age. Can't really discuss the topic too in depth, but it's a very common practice in most Islamic countries. Being allowed to be wed upon reaching puberty, which is definitely below the age of where people are sane enough to be able to make conscious decisions.
That's a common misconception when you look at that verse that says about maturity, and that in most Islamic countries there is an age of marriage where you can be married. There's no such thing as young marriages in most Islamic countries, at least. It's mostly 18 for the age of marriage. Let's be clear on that first. It is. I've looked it up.
Are you sure?
Yes. And your point about less oppressive, no oppressive, it is not oppressive in its nature.
So,
and when you mentioned that verse, what was that verse again? Could you remind me?
411.
411, what does it say?
For the male, a share equivalent that of two females. As in, let's say your father dies, your son would get twice that of whatever your daughter would.
What was what was before that?
I will have to pull up the full verse. I don't have it in front of me.
Yes, okay.
And just for reference, in what we said about age of marriage, in Iran, it's between 9 and 13. Or unless you're a boy, then it's 15. And on very rare occasions, a court order can increase it to 17.
Yeah.
However, the actual legal age is between 9 and 13. So that's not true.
Well, for most countries, I said, they're usually of like 16 to 18 years old, not as young as you expect it to be. But the point isn't that. The point is that these things that have been shown to be oppressive are now being nullified fully in the Quran, and whoever misinterprets these verses and hadiths for their own personal gain are not following Islam. Those are of the worst people.
Let me just read you the full 411. Allah commands you regarding your children, the share of the male will be twice that of the female. If you leave 1, 2, or more females, their share is 2/3 of the estate. But if it's only one female, her share will be 1/2. Each parent is entitled to 1/6 if you leave offspring. But if you are childless and your parents are the only heirs, then your mother will receive 1/3, but if you have two leave siblings, then your mother will receive 1/6 after the fulfillment of bequests and debts. Be fair to your parents and children, as you do not fully know who is more beneficial to you. This is an obligation from Allah. Surely Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. If you run the math on this, by the way, it doesn't make any sense at all. I can show it to you if you want.
I don't.
Have you heard this verse?
Aware of that. I haven't heard of
So,
this verse before.
fair enough.
and
I'm not going to hold it to
I
you.
lack the knowledge.
I'm not going to hold it to you. I'm
respond
just.
to that.
That is completely fair, and that's honorable that you admit that. I'm just going to explain to you what the
Yes.
problem with this one is. A man with a wife, two
Yes.
living parents, and
I
two
see the
daughters
problem.
dies.
See the problem with that.
When we start giving people their shares, the total
Yeah.
will be 112.5%.
And the other.
So your inheritance from the guy who died is more than he owns, according to the Quran's flawless math. 1/6 to mom, 1/6 to dad, 2/3 to daughters, and 1/8 to the widow. Adds up to 112.5%. That is not mathematically possible. But that wasn't the topic of the debate. Just thought I would mention it because it's halfway relevant. It is in the Quran, it's not hadith. So unless you're contradicting the Quran itself, a woman or a daughter is not worth that as much as a son in terms of inheritance.
I totally understand what you mean, but I don't have the knowledge to respond to that.
Fair enough. But if we go back up to, have you read Quran 282? It's about witnesses.
Witnesses, tell me more about that.
So it's a very common practice in Islam, specifically in Iran and I believe Saudi Arabia, but I could be mixing that up with Afghanistan. A woman's witness is worth that of one male. So if you're supposed to have two men witnessing something, it's fine if you have one man and two women, but not if you have one man and one woman. Because you need, if you read the actual verse 282, and bring to witness two witnesses from among your men, and if two men are not available, then a man and two women, so that if one of the women errs, the other can remind her, saying that women are just straight up less reliable. Because a woman cannot remind it on her own, he needs her female friend to remind her because she will probably err.
Again, I'm not fully versed in terms of all of the Quranic verses and hadiths, but that's another one I don't know that much about.
Fair enough. What about this one? Quran 434 then. Have you read this one?
Go on.
Men are in charge of women because Allah has made one of them excel the other. Righteous women are obedient, and of those from you whom fear disobedience, admonish them, banish them to beds apart and beat them.
And beat them?
Yep.
What's that?
It says beat them. In other parts of the Quran, it says either with the back of your hand, as in a light discipline. In other parts, it's more strict. Usually it's a lighter version. Either way, it's a physical interaction.
And this is stated in the Quran.
Yeah.
Right?
Quran 4:34.
Okay.
If you do not
First
believe me,
thing
you are
is-
fully free
first
to
thing-
quote check me on any of these.
First thing to note about these verses about physical violence and any form of roles for men and women. Prophet Muhammad, in Prophet Muhammad's life, he's clearly said the best of you are whoever are the best to their women, and if we uphold that example, then these Quranic verses cannot be taken literally as it contradicts what Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam abides by. And he never beaten a woman before, Prophet Muhammad. So, if we take that stance, Muslims should follow the example of the Prophet Muhammad because he is the bestest of examples and the walking Quran. And we shouldn't beat women down, and we should treat them with the best of our ability. That's my perspective on it. You feel free to debate on that.
That's a completely fine perspective to have, but you would then also need to acknowledge that it's contradictory to what the Quran says itself. If you want to say, yes, it's contradictory, but this is my stance, then I accept that. That's completely fine. You can say, hey, this guy, Muhammad said you should do this, and the other part of the Quran is just wrong.
My question would be to that. Does equality necessarily mean that the roles have to be identical, or do the roles have to be equal in worth and dignity? Or they're just different?
Well,
equal in worth and
we discussed worth, and the worth is half, both in terms of witnessing and in terms of inheritance. So that part is already a thing we went over. So in terms of
gender roles, not inheritance and testimonies.
Well, yeah, I agree that the roles of people are different in society, but that doesn't really answer the problem of oppression. Because, for example, you're aware of what a mahram is, right?
Mahram is a woman that you can't marry,
No.
Or your close relatives, like your father, mother.
No, a mahram, unless I'm mistaken here, is the person that follows the woman around because she can't go out on her own. She can't travel on her own.
That's a common overgeneralization you're making there. When in some cases, the woman is allowed to go on her own if there's nobody at home, or if she has to do something very important. For example, going to the grocery store to buy some food for a family, to provide for a family. Then that would be acceptable under Islamic teachings.
In the westernized version or the original one?
In some, that's the real original one.
Because in most Islamic countries it's not true.
Yes, and it is a generally recommended by most scholars into this, in that women have to have the presence of a wali when she's going outside, because the world is dangerous and could have possible, and it's about protection rather than limitation, I would say, of women's rights. I'd argue.
And if we go down the route of a separate oppression, let's say forced veiling.
Forced what?
Veiling, being forced to wear a burqa, niqab, or hijab. Let's say Iran.
What evidence do you cite?
Okay, so this is something that if you know this, I will be shocked and I'll concede debate flat out, but you can fact check me after. In Iran's penal code, specifically Article 638, hyper fucking specific, I know, I'm sorry. Women are legally required to wear hijab in public. Violations can result in fines, imprisonment, and even flogging. If you don't know what flogging is, essentially getting whipped. The direct quote of this is, anyone who openly commits haram act in public, such as appearing without an Islamic hijab, shall be sentenced to 10 days or 2 months in imprisonment or a fine, which is the Islamic Penal Code of Iran. In 2022, so this is not an obscure law that is not used anymore. This is a current law that's still being enforced. In 2022, Mahsa Amani, a 24-year-old woman, was beaten to death by Iran's morality police for allegedly wearing her hijab improperly. Her death has sparked national protest. This is just quoting is Iran. It's also true in Afghanistan as well, for example.
I follow you. I follow you for that. And rules regarding whether Muslim women who don't follow the teachings on the hijab is very dehumanizing, and it shouldn't be a thing, because those are of misinterpretations again. Those are misinterpretations of the Quran and what the Prophet Muhammad preached for, which was gentleness and accepting people of differing lifestyles in Islam. He was gentle to those.
You can sure take that interpretation.
And yes, we shouldn't force Muslim women to wear the hijab. Yes, it is God's command to do that, but it's not in our authority to impose it onto others. That is a common misconception. It's a common misconception that legal authorities fail to understand on this matter. And that also legal rulings on the punishments for these are unfortunately misrepresented from and deviate from Prophet Muhammad's teachings. Deviates largely. And the hijab is not a piece of cloth that women wear. It's a clothing code for both men and women. Men have to wear a type of hijab too, up to their knee, to cover below, from their chest area all the way to below the knees, below the navels. So it's not a women's only thing, it's also men's too. And that men also have to lower their gaze. It's not only women that you mentioned earlier that have to conduct this.
Sure, but have you read the full verse of that? The verse is to lower the gaze so that they shall not be tempted.
Yes, for both genders.
Or they can show some self-restraint, but that's my opinion, I guess. But forced veiling isn't just a cultural issue, it's a legal requirement under Islamic governments, quoted as being an Islamic penal code.
And that's a misinterpretation.
And it's been that way for hundreds of years.
Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's example of gentleness and acceptance of religion, and that shouldn't be
fair enough. I see what you mean.
Used to impose legal rulings on how to wear the hijab.
I see what you mean.
On wear the hijab.
Are you
and to be clear on this, legal, just because something is legal doesn't mean that reflects what Islam actually teaches. It's much more diverse than that, which you put examples of, like Iran and Afghanistan. Those are extreme examples. And interpretations are diverse, as in the 4 madhabs that have different methods to approaching to a interpretation.
So before I make my next argument, are you a Quran only person, or do you believe in Hadith as well? Because otherwise this point is not completely irrelevant.
I believe in using the Quran as a source, and the Hadith to be interpreted in the light of the Quran.
So, like,
and also one more thing to clarify about the Quran, about punishments. It does not prescribe any clear punishments for people who go against Islam, or people who do not follow rules, in terms of the hijab. That's up to Allah to decide, not the people, not everyday people.
So,
yeah.
I would assume that you take Sahih al-Bukhari to be like the best quality of hadith.
I disagree with that
No?
largely
Okay.
because Sahih al-Bukhari was written after 150 years after the Prophet Muhammad's death. It has several points that it slanders the Prophet Muhammad's name. For example, saying that whoever deviates somewhere, this is along the lines of whoever deviates from your religion, kill them, and which is distorted from Prophet Muhammad's gentleness and accepting attitude towards people of different religions, especially people of the book. We respect them real largely. And as Sahih al-Bukhari, this would question the hadiths that are in Sahih al-Bukhari and whether we should trust that in terms of making legal rulings in
Fair enough.
Islamic countries.
Since you said you're halfway read it, I'm just going to mention it anyway for anyone listening. Sahih al-Bukhari 5196. If a husband calls his wife to his bed and she refuses, he spends the night angry with her, and the angels curse her until the morning. Directly calling out links to sexual obedience and spiritual reward or punishment, frequently used in sermons and Islamic law to justify a woman's lack of sexual autonomy in marriage. But you rejected Sahih, so I'm not even going to continue on that one. What about Sunan Ibn Majah? I'm probably butchering the name, but I tried.
I'm not fully versed in terms of like hadiths. I only know a bit about Sahih al-Bukhari and not much about Ibn Majah. But
Fair
what
enough.
evidence would you want to raise?
I'll mention
And also, to be clear, when I say Sahih al-Bukhari has these problems, it doesn't mean I reject everything that Sahih al-Bukhari says.
Fair. Do you reject what I mentioned then?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it says whoever is the best, again, Prophet Muhammad, whoever is among the best of you are the best to their wives. Again, we cite Prophet Muhammad as our primary example after
So,
that.
and then if you read the Sunan Ibn Majah 1853, if I were to order anyone to prostrate to anyone other than Allah, I would have ordered women to prostrate to their husbands because of the rights Allah has given them over them. This hadith equates the husband's authority to such a level that were it not for prohibition of shirk, associating with partners of God, women would have been commanded to bow to their husbands. But it's not entirely relevant due to how you see hadiths. Have you read anything about Safiya bint Huyay, one of his wives? I'm gonna type it in side chat because I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of this. Safiya bint Huyay. Yeah, I probably fucked that up, but yeah.
Safiya bint Huyay.
Yeah, I have no idea how to pronounce that. Either way, this woman was essentially a capture of war. It was between him, Islamic group, during the Battle of the Khaybar in 628. Her husband was killed, and so were her parents. So was her father, so was her husband.
Following so far?
Yep. After the battle, she was taken in by the Muslims. She was told that you can either convert to Islam and marry me, being Muhammad, or you can return to your people. Some Muslims, quite a lot, see this as the mercy of Muhammad, saying, He could have just essentially raped her and took her right there. Instead, he gave her the choice. But in my eyes, this is even more fucked up, since their entire tribe was slaughtered. Saying, marry me or join them is equivocally the same as saying, join me or join your dead relatives. It's a roundabout way of saying, join me or die.
Yes, and what happened after that?
She said, I'll convert, I love you.
That's a difficult one to reconcile with. Okay.
After the Battle of Khaybar, she was taken captive. Muhammad offered her the choice of converting to Islam and becoming his wife or returning to her people. She chose to convert and become his wife. Because no fucking shit. Hey, this is this completely dead city where everyone you ever knew is dead. There's no food, there's no anything because we slaughtered all of them. You can join them or you can marry me.
Reminder, you guys have 2.5 minutes left.
Okay. Okay, sure. That's a difficult one.
It is. And this is Muhammad himself and his wife. You could also make the same question regarding Aisha, but we're not really going to get into that one. A similar question anyway. I think that concludes the debate.
I think it does. I think it does. You've established some good points. Good points there. We respect that. very much.
I respect your honesty and being genuine and very peaceful in this debate. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, that's it then, guys. 1 minute was left. I thoroughly enjoyed this debate. Probably the most civil debate I've moderated on this server. It's there. It's like number one. So thank you very much. If you guys want to,
closing remarks.
Want to have like a closing remarks, you can have like a few minutes each. Like 5 minutes, let's say. So whenever you guys want to start, you can do it. Again, Upog, you started first. You should also start this one too. So if you want to, you can start it whenever you want.
I'm going first, yes?
Yep.
Okay. So to conclude this, I think it's rather clear that on not every, but most turns, Islam has different variations of oppression, or at least sexism. But if you count that as oppression, it's a different discussion. I personally would, and I think I've established that on pretty much every turn. Even on Muhammad himself, the Quran itself, the Hadith itself, depending on which Hadith you prefer, of course, them being written ages later or being verbalized ages later is a different point entirely. So I think all of them are questionable at best, but even then, they were all, well, not all, but most of them conveying the same message of there being a vast difference between male and female, or man and woman. I do really appreciate the thorough and calm, respectful discussion we've had, and I do definitely respect Jacolak for, on such short notice, accepting the challenge to take it up to the stage. Hands off. I appreciate that. You took your words where your mouth was, essentially. So I think I've said what I need to and proven my point. If anyone has any questions for that afterwards, I don't know if you had any Q&A questions. If we did, then I guess we'll do that.
I haven't seen any, but yeah, I mean, people, this might be a good reminder. Remember, guys, you can tag the MDD.
The bot's broken.
Bot. Is it broken?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you can tag
Daniel.
yeah, you can tag me if you guys have like any questions for any of the debaters, and I will ask the questions. In the meantime, Jacolak, you can take it up for your final remarks on this. So yes, go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, sure. To conclude this whole debate, what would you call it? Okay. To conclude this whole debate, is Islam, whether oppressive or not, has had benefits for society at the time it was introduced, where female infanticide were common and women were being inherited like property, and women were forced to marry and couldn't get to divorce. Regardless of whether it's oppressed, we cannot deny that the context at the time and the rights is given to women at the time was shown to be monumental. Can represent, for example, again, lots of examples, but women's name remains intact after marriage, right of male relative to financially provide for, and can represent themselves in court, to testify before judge, and to speak out. What is the issue here is that of cultural distortions, political, cultural, and ideological distortions that are about women's rights in Islam, and we should aim to challenge these distortions to promote a positive view of women in Islam. And yes, there were several points I couldn't answer, but that was due to my lack of intelligence and lack of knowledge. But the point remains. The benefits Islam has given at the time was insurmountable. And all those extremist organizations that follow Islam are not of us. They are of the misguided and misinterpret religion for control. And Islam is not about that. That's it, guys, and I hope you all have a good day.
Okay, thank you very much for this, Jacolak. Thus far, I only see 2 sort of questions. One was for you, Upogo. I think